leadership today is, I guess you could say loud, titles, charisma, authority, presence. You know, I'm a coach. I'm a leadership coach, a soft skills coach, and I talk to leaders all the time about their presence, if you will. And it's not that I don't think any of those things aren't important, but there's more to it, and that's what our guest is going to say, going to talk to us about. But I will also say that the longer I do this work, the more convinced, that I am that real growth doesn't come from, let's say leadership, if you will, or growth doesn't come from being impressive. It comes from being connected, if you will. That if there's a secret sauce to being a great leader, that might be one of them. And my guest today, he challenges a very powerful assumption that influence flows from, who you are uh, to people instead of, he argues that, it flows through a relationship with people. And I completely agree with him. So when people feel seen, safe, understood, growth accelerates, leadership deepens, and clearly trust begins to form. And so my guest brings this rare blend of, first of all, lived experience as a wartime officer. He's a Marine and a father who grew into leadership early, and we're going to ask him about that. And frankly, a storyteller who understands, how connections shape identity and behavior. And so today we're exploring what it really means to lead last, which is a book that he's writing. We're going to ask him about this, grow from the inside out and build trust that actually changes people, that influences people. So my guest today is Olaolu Ogunyemi. He is a U.S. Marine officer, an award-winning author. He's a mentor. He's the founder of a Parent-Child Connect. He's also a devoted husband and father of three, whose works sits at the intersection of leadership, faith, storytelling, and human connection. So he is also, as I alluded to, he's an Amazon best-selling children's book author and a YouVersion content partner, known for helping parents and leaders build trust-driven relationships rooted in presence, self-awareness, and intentional connection. His leadership philosophy has been shaped by growing into fatherhood at a young age and refined through his service in the Marine Corps, blending discipline with empathy and authority with humility. So lead last at the heart of his work is simple but powerful. People grow best when they feel seen, safe, and understood, as I just said. So if you would, please welcome to my podcast, Olaolu Ogunyemi, otherwise known as Lou. Welcome to Grow Yourself.
Hey, Kevin, thank you so much for having me. I'm very excited to be here. And every time I hear that intro, people are talking about the things that I've done and the things that, sort of describing who I am.
Yeah.
I always pause to say, man, who are they talking about? They're still talking about me or some other guy. But
Yeah.
it's sort of cool to hear some of those things. And I definitely appreciate you bringing me on to have a conversation.
No, the pleasure's mine. Well, listen, I can say up front, knowing and I should clarify for the people listening and watching right now that you're not just a veteran, you are literally in active duty right now as a Marine officer. You've been in 12 years and you're currently in a great leadership program out in Virginia. I think you said it is. And so I thank you for your service and I just look forward to hearing from you because here's what I know. I know you're a young guy, well, according to me, and you're a major, but you're 35 years old. And but here's the thing that I know: you've been in 12 years, and I don't think other civilians necessarily know this, that you're even though you're 35 years old, you are probably an old soul when it comes to leadership because you've been doing it for a long time. And in the military, I don't diminish leaders that are in the private sector or even in the government, but you've been in 12 years, you're a major, you've got some serious training and leadership experience behind you. Right? Share that. I mean, again, we're not diminishing anybody else, but people think, oh, 35 years old, what could he possibly know? Let me tell you something, folks. He knows a lot.
Yeah, it's fun to even think about because
Yeah.
as we start off from my story in the Marine Corps, I started off as a brand new lieutenant in charge of 80 people, and that was the most intimidating thing that I think I've ever done in my life. You
What,
know,
22 years old, right?
22
Probably.
years old. That's right.
Yeah.
Leading 80, I was responsible for 80 different people, and one of which, the most senior of which, was in for 19 and a half years. So you can only imagine the intimidation, all the lessons I learned in that first 2 years. And
Yeah.
of course, I continue to learn over the
Yeah.
last decade plus. But
Yeah.
yeah, there's a lot of learning that we have to do. And quite honestly,
That's
it's
right.
trial by fire.
That's interesting because I was happened to be an enlisted guy. I retired in 20 E7, but the thing about it is that, and especially the work that I did in the Air Force, a fair amount of it was in human relations education. So I paid attention to the people part of it. The thing about it is that we always watched young lieutenants and tried to say to ourselves, okay, where's this lieutenant going? Are they coming in humble, or are they gonna come in here like a bull in a china shop, right? And you sounds like maybe you took the former, from a humble standpoint.
I did, and to give credit to the recruiter who actually brought me into the Marine Corps, because I initially was going to go enlisted as an Army retired E7. Told me, he's like, "Yeah, you should do that first so you can humble yourself." And
Oh,
this other guy, one of my mentors, came and told me, "Hey, man, it's all about just making sure that you look out for people. Yeah, that's
yeah,
all it is. You don't
yeah,
have to go try to change your career path or anything else." And then my recruiter just sort of gave me the rundown. He talked to me about what it looks like for a lieutenant to come in as a bull in the China shop at the reproach. And he said that's not going to work for me very well. And
yeah.
I
Good.
always thought it's funny. He's out now. His name is Sergeant Nash. But I mean, he talked to me about it because he knew my aspirations to be an officer. And he said, listen, if there's something I could tell you about your future, is if as a brand new lieutenant, no matter how old you are or how young you are, if you go in there without humility, I can assure you that you won't last long because your Marines are just going to shut you out, especially that senior enlisted. And I tell you,
Yes.
I almost did it. I still almost did it because there's that pull to say that, well, I'm in charge. I have to make
Yeah.
decisions and all those
Yeah.
things. The Marine Corps put me here to do
Yeah.
this because they just trained you for, a
Yeah.
year and a half to come in and say those things. But then I had that thought in the back of my mind, like, well, this guy's been in 19
Yeah.
and a half years. He
Yeah.
probably knows what he's talking about. And yes, I'm going
Yeah.
to come in with all my bright ideas because I'm new and I'm
Right.
excited, but he's
Lots of
going to have to
energy. Yep.
mentor and guide me. So that's one of the lessons I learned.
Yeah, very, very well said, and I appreciate your honesty about that. That you almost did it, and I would love for you to just while we're on this topic, I'm going to jump back in just a second, but while we're on this topic, share this idea with younger leaders in the private sector. What are your thoughts to them? Again, we know, and the difference, of course, in the military as a young lieutenant, you do wield some power. I mean, you're an officer in charge, and you could step in there and because I think the other thing is that we run into in the private sector as well is this idea that, you know, maybe it's not like completely ego driven, like this hardcore ego thing, but you feel like you don't want to come in and embarrass yourself and sound like you don't know what you're talking about. But guess what? You really don't. So the only choice is to put up this facade or to be humble in some form. So please share your thoughts about this for younger leaders in the private sector now about being a new supervisor, a new manager.
Yeah, thank you. That's a phenomenal question, Kevin, because one thing I really paid attention to as I talk to emerging leaders is they have this tension. It's because this organization, whether it be a corporation or it be a military or private sector, wherever it may be, they hired you because of your expertise. They hired you because you have a degree. Some
Hmm.
of the times they hired you because of your leadership experience in the past. And so you have all these things that you're bringing to the table, and they're paying you potentially more than they're paying the people that you're leading. And so you have this idea that, man, this company has now invested in me. And so I have to come in and show them that I'm worth the investment. And so it really is an admirable thing when you really think about it. Because I used to think it was an egotistical thing until I stopped and started talking to people and realized that they were just trying to do their best to make themselves valuable to the organization. And
Yeah.
that's the hard part because now you're saying that I've been hired for my ability to speak. I've been hired for my ability to make decisions in pressure situations, as most of us have sat in interviews, as I did when I was, applying to be a worker at Tyson Foods as a computer programmer. I had to answer a question about how I respond in high pressure situations. The same thing I had to answer in the Marine Corps. And so I know we all have these assumptions as we go in, and we feel like we have to give the answers. And so I definitely understand, especially
Sure.
from an emerging leader's perspective. But the biggest thing is there are so many ways that you can go about doing it. You can come in and say, well, the company has invested in me and I have to give the answer. And you can come in and pretend that you have all the answers, especially about
Yeah.
the organization that you're in.
Yeah.
The problem is you're going to very quickly lose people's attention, and you're
Yeah.
going to very quickly lose their trust because you're going to make a mistake. That's what's going to happen. You will make a mistake, and it's inevitable. But if you come in with a humble approach, and that's not saying that walking into the room and saying, hey, I don't know what's going
No,
on,
no.
guys, please help me. But you're walking into the room and just saying, hey, guys, I'm new to the team. I'm excited to be here. Hey, somebody tell me what is your perspective on what's going on? And there's some ways to present yourself. As you already talked about command presence or being a present leader, you present it as, hey, I'm not coming here and saying, hey guys, please help, I'm lost. But you
Yeah.
present it as, hey, I'm learning this organization and I want to partner with you to lead this organization. That's really what it's about. It's giving other people respect, the people with tenure and who've been there for a while, giving them the respect that they've earned over the last several years.
Absolutely. Very well said. And it goes without saying in the sense that it's not a dichotomy either. You like kind of like you're saying, it's not either that you come in completely humble and meek, or you come in like again a bull in a china factory. It's a continuum, and sometimes you have to, and this would apply right in any leadership position that it's a bit of it's a continuum, a spectrum, if you will, and sometimes you have to be more in charge, and sometimes you have to be more collaborative, and you have to. But the only way to learn these things is, in fact, to pay attention, to listen to those who've been around you, to have good mentors, and all those sorts of things. Well, listen, let's just jump back. Uh, I always ask the guests this, tell us about little Lou, where you grew up, about your parents, your life growing up, whatever. I mean, I just want people to know a little bit who's behind the man here.
Yeah, absolutely. So I was born the fifth of six children in Ruston, Louisiana. So my dad actually immigrated from Nigeria for college, and he ended up going to Alabama A&M for his undergrad, and then
Nice.
got his graduate degree in University of Illinois. So he got his PhD in education, and he met my mom while at University of Illinois, and then they eventually moved to Louisiana, and that's where I was born, myself and my little brother. So like I said, it's six of us, four boys, and this it's important I
Wow.
tell you this dynamic too because my two older sisters are 12 and 14 years older than me, so they were they were like my mentors, sort of guide, almost like my second and third mom, if you will. Then my brothers, we're all 2 years apart, except my younger brother, who's about 4 or 5 years younger than me. And so we were more, ramming each other, just trying to figure out how to get
Yeah.
the answer out of each other. Really, just truly trying to figure out life and grow through the environment of testosterone and trying to, that sometimes unhealthy competition. I think most times we were healthy competition, but there are a lot of times where we also had unhealthy competition going on.
Sure.
So that's
Of
the
course.
environment I grew up in. We competed in everything. We competed in sports. We competed in academics. You name it. And that's indicative of who I am as a person. I'm a very competitive person. I love trying to work through problem sets and complex problems, and that's just who I've become. I also grew up very insecure, right? So I grew up as a
Interesting.
person who just wanted to fit in. My family set up this loving environment for me. But as you already alluded to, my name is Olaolu Ogunyemi, and I grew up in Ruston, Louisiana. Not necessarily
Right.
the way I'm going to fit in, right? And so it was one of those interesting things. Just I was trying to fit in and trying to find my identity. And sometimes the way that you do that in those environments is that you do almost the most extreme things in order to fit in. And I put that in air quotes for those who are watching to fit in with the crowd. And I was fitting in with the wrong crowd. But for me, I had mentors outside of the home and people outside of the home who continually invested time and tried to make it better for me, which leads to my life work of just trying to look out for those young men and young women who may be just like me, just trying to fit in, trying to find themselves, and unfortunately are finding themselves in the wrong place. And so
Yeah.
I'm all about community and teamwork because of the large family, because of the community that surrounded me and helped me to be who I am today.
Mhm.
So that's really who I am. That's my childhood. Got
Very
married
interesting.
at very early. In fact, I got commissioned in the Marine Corps in 2012, and the very next day was my wedding. So I
Wow.
always joke with my wife that I married the Marine Corps first. Sometimes that joke doesn't go over well. But when I graduated college, I was already married. I was 22 years old, and I had a 3-year-old daughter. And so I had a very early start to my parenthood, very early start to leadership in general. And that's when I commissioned the Marine Corps, and the rest is history. Moved around, met some phenomenal people, worked in joint environments, worked in the just marine only environment. It's been a phenomenal career thus far. I've been having a lot of fun. Nothing negative to say about the military service, but I've also had the opportunity to build my Parent Child Connect brand on the side. So that's who I am. That's my background. And again, it's just it's a
Wow.
blessing to be this far as I am now.
Yeah, did you find yourself in wartime situations?
I
Did you
did, yeah.
go
So
abroad?
I
Yeah.
have. I've been to Afghanistan at least once. I went to Kuwait, and I actually found myself in Turkey in response to earthquakes. Most recently, I
Mm,
was actually in the Eastern Mediterranean, really looking at the problem that was going on in Israel and Lebanon, and
hmm
just paying attention to that and being ready to respond to that. So we
hmm
found ourselves forward deployed a few times so far.
Yeah. Lou, how is leadership different in wartime scenarios versus peacetime or any other form of leadership? Are there some just, um, principles that you have to that guide you there that are different?
Yeah, so I would say that the best leadership is made in peacetime. And that's the time
Yeah.
where you're having those simple moments, those connective
hmm
moments with your people, your Marines. Not quite honestly, that extends to your family.
Yeah.
It's most important when you are in that peaceful time to establish those relationships and those connections, because that's when you know in the more stressful times when you make decisions that may not be popular, they already know that you're making a decision with their best interest at heart. It's hard to do that if you don't have that relationship prior to. It really is a challenge to go out and say,
Yep.
"Hey, we're going to do X, Y, and Z," and it sounds completely off, but they don't know what your intent is. They truly sometimes they may think that
Point. Yeah.
you're just trying to be a career, so you're trying to get
Yeah.
the next promotion, or you're just trying to be a yes man, or whatever it is. But if they know you because you built those moments of camaraderie, you've played cards, whether you play spades behind the scenes, you spent time getting to know them and their family and things of that nature, they're more inclined to trust you when you make decisions, especially in the hard decisions. So I would say that they're intertwined in that you have to make that connection first, that relationship first, before you're able to deploy forward. And it's very, very challenging if you don't have that relationship beforehand.
Yeah, and it's not as though, and I think people could assume this about the military that, and I've heard this before when we talk about leadership. People are like, well, I mean, you really don't have to motivate your troops because, they have to follow your orders. And while that certainly is true, there is a difference in terms of the level, you know, one is I'm full in, got your back 100%. You don't have to, you don't have to say anything except let's go. And then the other one is like, well, I mean, even in your own mind, you're stuttering like, why do I have to listen to this fool? And all of these sorts of things. Well, that mindset, that attitude is all the difference when you get into really difficult situations. Would you agree?
Oh, absolutely. And
hmm
that's really the hard part sometimes for leaders to understand is
hmm
that again, you just have to be able to make that connection first. And I'll give an example because you're right that there is the
Please.
idea that you have to follow orders and they're going to do it. So when I was an operations officer in my second year in the Marine Corps, I understood that operations officers are supposed to be very strict. They're like the hammer for the commanding officer and all these kind of things. And so that's what I was doing. I was being the hammer. And then what I realized though, and it's only because my mentor sat me down and talked to me about it, one of my mentors, is that I realized that as I'm trying to be that hammer, that forceful guy, they were doing what I was saying because it's the military. And they also doing it because they didn't want to be nagged. But the problem is that's not true discipline. That's
No.
not, because what we're not getting towards is them doing the right thing, even when nobody's around, or doing the right thing aligned with the commander's intent. And that's really what the military service, and quite honestly, I believe all organizations strive for, is having people who have the initiative and self-discipline to do the right thing, what's aligned with their organization, even when they're not being directly supervised. And it's hard to get to that point if you're walking in and you're just forcing them to do the work, forcing them to do the work. And that's what we had to learn. I had to learn as a young leader, is that, man, if I'm walking in and every time they're coming in a room, I'm just telling them, hey, shut up, sit down, this is how we're going to do business,
Yeah.
then of course they're going to do it. It's going to happen. But how is that mission going to happen without my supervision? When I'm out of the picture, are they still going to do it, or are they going to find another way, or try to find another way around it? And so that's really what we have to understand, is that yes, people may do what you said because they have to, but in some place you have to be able to influence them to be able to do it because they want to align with the organization's goals and values.
Wow. Love that. You just mentioned mentor. What is your experience with mentors, and what would you say to, again, I'm going to just say young leaders out there or young professionals out there, young people out there, about the value of a mentor, what they can do for them, and why they should have a mentor? Because I'm completely in your camp with mentors.
Mentors are absolutely essential,
What
no
is a
matter what.
mentor?
So a mentor is a person who can guide you through situations. That's how I look at a
Love
mentor.
it.
Somebody who
Yep.
can guide you through life circumstances. For example, I have a parental mentor. In this case, it's my father, my mother. I call them when I just want to talk. And there's many times, and this is the benefit of having a mentor, they can hear the way you're describing a situation, and they can understand based upon their experience the kind of the way that you're coming to your decision. And so when you're having that conversation with them and they're understanding how you're coming to that decision, they're starting to be able to help guide you in your future decisions, even when you don't know it. There's times when my dad has been talking to me about things, and then I'm like, yeah, that's what I thought. And I'm continuing to go back and forth in conversation. And then, 5, 6 days later, I'm like, wait a minute. I just did what he just sort of did, this mind judo trick on me.
Yeah,
He
that's
made me do
right.
this, but that's what mentors are there for. They're there to
Uh,
be honest with you, but they also provide this wealth of knowledge and experience, basically because you don't have it, and that's the only way for us to learn, especially as young leaders. And I think that's what I had to learn as a young leader, is that mentors are there to help me out, because again, I don't have that experience. I have this energy, I have this passion, I have all these other things, but I don't have the experience, and they have another perspective that I will never have, because they're a different human. And so that's what the importance of mentors is, just having people there who have a different perspective and who are able to look you in the face and be completely honest with you, instead of sort of sugarcoating, because without which you sort of don't get feedback on who you truly are. And when you're trying to be authentic, you're trying to learn how to be a better leader, that feedback is extremely important.
you would, I assume, agree that a kid coming out of high school, a young man, young woman, 18 years old, find a mentor, right? Just a mentor, and you would agree.
Oh, absolutely.
And
In
where,
your natural, yeah.
yeah, and where do they? Where would you recommend? I mean, I'm this is the question straight off the top of my head, and so you have no idea I'm asking this, but where would you go to find a mentor? What would they do?
That's a phenomenal question. It's
Mhm.
the natural environment. So, for example, if you're into sports or band or whatever your extracurricular activity is, talk to that person who's in charge. In many cases, sometimes that person in charge is very willing to mentor you, especially in that area of which you're actually practicing. Sometimes it's somebody who's just slightly older than you, and somebody who's been in the band for a little bit longer, or been in whatever sport for a little bit
Mm,
longer. But on the flip side, I saw something done by one of my mentors. He saw me and he came up to me and said, "Hey, I agree to be your mentor." And we laughed about it because I thought it was hilarious, because especially in the military, when you're sitting there as a junior, I was a captain at the time, and this guy
mm,
is a senior lieutenant colonel, and he walked up to me and was like, "Yep, I agree to be your mentor." And I started laughing, and luckily it was that kind of relationship we had,
yeah,
because I
yeah.
was like, "Man, I don't know how he knew I wanted to ask him that, but I didn't know how to present, because we were thinking, how do
Stop.
I do this formal conversation to ask somebody to
Yeah,
mentor me?" And so I say on both sides. On one side, as the person coming out of high school or college, find your natural community, the things that you're interested in, and people who are good at where you want to be, and just ask them. And on the other side, if you are that professional and you have the time in your day, find somebody who you know is trying to be who you are,
100%.
and mentor them. And just say, hey man, do you want to learn some things? I can teach you how to do that. And
Yeah.
just don't be a sales pitchy or anything. Just go up to them and say, hey man, I'll help you out. Or if you want to, and you know their personality is probably like mine, just walk up to them and say, hey, I agree to be your mentor. Let's just knock that out of the way and let's start this relationship. And and
Yeah.
that may work. So just find a way on both sides to start building that mentor mentee
I
relationship.
love that. And I think it's important, particularly for young people, to understand that you can approach mentorship a lot of different ways, but like for instance, you can just, you know, I could use you as a mentor and never ask you to mentor me. I may just say anything from just asking you some questions or say, hey, Lou, every now and then I have questions about this, that, and the other. Would you mind if I ask? You say no. Or you could go a little more formal. I could come up and I say, hey, Lou, I love the way that you lead your philosophy. Would you consider mentoring me? And so, I mean, there's different approaches, but I think the key that you're speaking of here is that it's just somebody that can guide you, can show you the way. And sometimes I want to beg young people to go get you a mentor to help you just learn the path. Okay, so there you have that. I appreciate you flowing with that. So let me ask. You did say I think that you suggest that I think you sort of alluded to it earlier on that your life could have gone a completely different direction. And this was you were talking about when you were hanging out with the wrong people, right?
That's right.
And so what was there a decision making point? I mean, was there literally a time where you went, this ain't going the way it should, or did I think Nigerian moms, they can kind of pop a knot in your head here, right? I mean, that from what I understand about Nigerian moms, they don't play. You know, I don't know if your mom was that way, or did somebody say, hey, it ain't going the right way. We need to course correct. How did you go back in and get on the right path again, if you will?
Yeah, absolutely. So I would say it was a joint effort. It was between my parents, it was between my siblings, and definitely other people in my community, coaches, and so on and so forth. But there's this one moment that I have to stick a pin in because
Please.
as an assistant principal at my school, and she would get on to my brothers about uniforms, like the shirts, because we had to wear uniforms. And the shirts that we had that we bought from Walmart or wherever we bought it from, like slightly off color gold. And she was like, send them to the office and things of that nature. So there was this tension between her and my parents at one point, and I'll never forget it. So every time I saw her, I'm like, oh boy, I gotta go the other direction. But fast forward to I think I was in middle school, maybe junior high, and I get in trouble. I did, call this guy out in the bathroom. It's my turn to fight. I was one another notch on my belt. And this guy, he fought everybody else in the school. But for some reason that day, I guess he didn't want to fight, and we never fought. But that day, I told him we were going to fight. We got to the bathroom, and long story short, I hit him, and he runs out directly to the office and goes and tells the principal. I
Oh,
mean, it wasn't
wow.
even like he skipped the teacher. He just ran directly to the office, and I remember like my heart sinking, like, oh
Oh,
my
hello.
goodness, this was supposed to be like a back and forth fight. We both get suspended and we move on with our lives. But of course, now if I hit him, unprovoked, and he already said sorry, and I hit him, now that's moving towards expulsion. And I remember getting down to the office when they finally called me down. It's about 30 minutes later, and this guy's holding ice over his face, and it's bad. And the principal pulls me in, and she says she pulls out the referral that she had, and she said, "You know what? I could kick you out of school for this, and you know that your parents would not expect that from you. This is not who you are.
Mm.
So I'm going to take this and put it in my drawer, and this is your last chance." And I will never forget that moment. She gave me one more chance, and I remember thinking, like, why would she even do that? Out of all the things that I thought about her, about
Yeah.
always correcting us, always picking on my brothers, all these things she's doing, knowing good and well that that should have been the last straw, especially the nature of what I did. Why would she give me that second chance? And I always thought about that. And fast forward to about 2 years ago, before she retired, she's the one who invited me back to the school to read to the students and talk to them and all those kind of things and encourage them, because now you can see the full circle. And it's just amazing to know that that kind of person existed,
Yeah.
and she gave me that opportunity. And then I can compare to other people in my life. I had all those opportunities, all those mentors, all those people who were
Yeah.
working with me. Then I look at my buddy, one of my buddies I grew up with. When he got in trouble, we both could be doing the same thing. They'll pull me to the front of the classroom and say, "You know better. Your dad will come. If I have to call your dad, then and I'll straighten up." For him, they'll put him in the back of the classroom because there's nobody to call. And
Wow.
that's what really speaks to me right now today. And that's why I want to do what I do. Is because it's that guy who gets put in the back of the classroom because there's nobody to call, whether it be, his mom is working 3 jobs, his dad is out of the picture. I think his dad in this case was in prison. There's all these cases that happen, and it's like, man, we got to find a way to get those young people and give them that same chance that I had, give them those same mentors that I had to get them through that situation. So that was a big, big difference. It was the community who came around me because my parents were in the picture. My parents, my father was there saying that, no, you will not do this. And people said, we expect more out of you. And so they were supporting me and providing for me. And they're the reason I actually did not go the same direction that a lot of my buddies did growing up.
Wow. Yeah. You know, I think that goes back to a little bit about what your whole thesis is about leadership, about relationships and trust. And that is that I have to assume by what you said that this assistant principal, they knew your core, they knew your parents, they knew um, this ain't going to go over well with his folks. And so that inspired her to give you another chance. And by the way, the visual of this sitting in my drawer, that's pretty compelling too. You know,
Yeah.
that this is your last chance and the next one I'm pulling bits back out. Well, listen, you mentioned just moving forward here, you mentioned that first of all that you were a father very early in life. I mean, 22, but that, did becoming a father, did it, and if it did, how did it reshape your thinking about leadership?
Yeah, so I was blessed to have grandparents to help us because we were still in college. So 19 when my oldest was born. And
Oh,
it was one of
19.
those,
Oh,
yeah,
okay.
19. I
Yeah,
was
that's
3. I mean,
different.
she was 3 when I graduated
Ooh,
college.
Lord.
So yeah, initially, ironically, I thought I knew more than I knew, right? And especially when I wanted to prove myself as a man, I've
Yeah,
I've now
sure.
made it to this point, and I'm like, well, I have to prove myself. I am a leader, no different from what we had to learn as emerging leaders. It's like,
Yeah,
well, I have to prove myself. But in reality, I was like, I'm completely lost. I need so
yeah.
much help to raise this young human. And oh yeah, I thought that, especially I thought I was gonna have all boys for some reason. I had this thought in my mind, probably because
I
I grew
wonder
up in a
why.
house
Yeah, yeah.
mostly boys. And so I had no idea how to even interact with this young lady that I now have. And so
Interesting.
in my mind, I'm just like, man, I don't know what to do, but I can't show that weakness and I had to I felt like there was a lack of vulnerability because I wanted to be the man. I wanted to be in charge and I wanted to control the situation. But that's what it taught me at a very early age is that there's absolutely nothing wrong with asking for help. And you should, in fact, ask for help because that was in her best interest. So by asking for help, I was hoping to expand her community and help her to have a group of loving people, giving her a relationship with her grandparents and giving her a relationship with other people in the church and in the community, everybody who wanted to be a part of our lives to help us out. I gave her the opportunity because I got rid of my old way of thinking that, hey, I got this. I don't need anybody's help. I know how to make these decisions for my own household. So that really shaped who I was in that regard. And then the second thing is I had to truly learn how to lead her, my oldest daughter. I had to learn how to lead her in particular because again, growing up in a house full of boys, we just clashed, and there's times when my parents got called, and they're like, "Hey, they're going to kill each other. They're about to fight." And by the time my parents show up, we're all hanging out, laughing, having a good time, eating, playing games, whatever it is. And that's just how we did. We
Yeah,
clashed
yeah,
real quick, we fought, and then it's over. We
yeah.
move on. And I realized that's not a good parental way or way for me to parent my daughter. And I couldn't do all the yelling and all the scream, all the kind of stuff that I had done my entire life, call it leadership. I wasn't able to do that with my daughter. And so that was the lesson I had to learn. Okay, how can I best lead her? And again, luckily, my dad came and told me that. He's like, you have to understand, let the child teach you how to lead her. She's going to teach you things that you would have never
Right.
known yourself. There's no book out there, there's no online article that you're going to learn.
Wow.
She's going to teach you how to lead her. And I remember him saying that. I was like, wow, that's
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 profound.
that's pretty powerful. But can you give an example of how you let her show you how to lead her?
Yeah, for one, as a child, I didn't pay attention until you raised your voice. That was just me. It's almost like that was just who I was.
Yeah.
Maybe it's just my way of comprehending information. It's like, okay, my dad just raised his voice. That means he's serious. Now, what was he
Mm.
saying for the last 15 minutes? For my daughter, she doesn't need that. She hears you the first time. So when
Oh,
you raise
interesting.
your voice towards her, she now feels like you've broken that relationship, that connection that you had. And that's one of the things that I had. I started off, I think she was maybe 4 years old, and she did something. And normally I'll just stop and say, hey, don't do that. But because it was something that I think was a little bit bigger and I wanted to make sure she got the point, I raised my voice, don't do that. And I just saw her break. And
Oh,
that was the first
wow.
time I realized, like, oh, wait, oh no, that's not what I was trying to do. I don't want to break the relationship or make her feel like I'm breaking the connection between her and me because I wanted to, assert myself. I wanted to get the point
Yeah.
home. And so that's
Yeah.
like the first thing. And the other thing is the time spent. I learned from her that she requires a certain amount of time. And when I say a certain amount of time, it's dedicated, uninterrupted. And now we call it tea time, and where we just
Hmm.
sit down and she tells me the tea, and obviously at times I'm actually sipping tea. But she needs that dedicated time, whereas me and my 12-year-old son, we don't have that same, like we may
Right.
do it over sports or something like
Right.
that
Right.
like
Right.
that.
Right.
But if I ask him, hey man, tell me about your friends at school, he's gonna say, oh, they're good, and one of my friends played basketball today, and that's about all I get out of him.
Right. Right. Right.
Whereas my
Right.
oldest daughter, she's going to go in much more detail. She'll have a lot more things to say, and that helps. That helps to build our connection. So
Yeah.
it's truly understanding who the child is and what they need.
Yeah. So I see. So, paying attention more than just to what they're saying, but like you said, you saw her nonverbals when you kind of yelled at her and those sorts of things. So pay attention and they will give you the cues of what they need from a leader, is
That's right.
what you're saying. Well, that's fascinating. Now, you you talk about, people needing to feel seen and safe. And what actually creates that in real life? I mean, how do you do that in real life? I want to ask one more thing before I come. I'm kind of talking about that, but let me go back because I just thought about this and I don't want to leave it. But you mentioned vulnerability and the need to be vulnerable. This I think is a real point of contention for people now because, and I'm just going to share my opinion. You don't have to agree with it, but I feel like particularly for men, the pendulum has swung way to the other side. That the now the famous beta boys type thing where women insisted that they be seen more. And I'm not arguing against that, but I'm trying to make the point that I see a lot more men have become much softer in their style, and much more vulnerable in their style. Again, wouldn't say that's entirely wrong, but I think the pendulum's swung too far. And so I want to get back to this idea that vulnerability is, you know, again, it's not a dichotomy. You aren't either all vulnerable or all toxic, however you want to say that. So would you mind sharing for the boys, the men, the young leaders out there, even the women, your thoughts about this factor of vulnerability? Where does it come in? How do you play that well so that it does what it's supposed to without making people think, oh, this dude's, just not even a leader.
Yeah, and that's tough. It really is
Yeah,
because for our entire lives, in many of our cases, our vulnerabilities, when we think about that and we lay them out on the table, the first thing that we think about is those vulnerabilities being exploited. If we're going to
correct.
use, for example, that's a military term. It's like
Yeah.
we truly do look for vulnerable spots to where we can now go in and infiltrate and take
Hmm.
advantage of the situation. That's how it
Hmm.
works. And so that's how we started off. And I think it
Hmm.
was survival instinct over the years to say, you know what, I'm going to hide those vulnerabilities so that nobody can take advantage of me. And so again, I think it's well placed when people are talking about hiding their vulnerabilities and not letting people in.
That's right.
In some cases, though, especially with your internal organization and your internal circle, your inner circle, that's where you're supposed to allow some vulnerabilities to show. Keyword allow. And when I say that, I don't mean walking in to your wife or significant other or to your team and just completely breaking down in tears. Say, oh, guys, I don't know what's going on. Because to me, that's now you're not just being vulnerable, you're not projecting emotions onto the team. And quite honestly, you're showing that you're not reliable and unable to control your
Wow.
emotions. But what I suggest to people is when you're trying to share vulnerabilities, you're only doing it, you're sharing those intentionally, so that way you can have somebody else come in and help you out in the places that you're weak. It's like plugging the gap. So in this case, if I were to let's look at it from a
Interesting.
sports metaphor. If I look at my offensive line in football, and I know I have one offensive lineman that's a little bit weaker, I'm going to be looking at my team, my coach in the sidelines and say, hey, guy, I know that, Lou is on the offensive line and he's just a little bit weak in this spot. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to move a running back or a tight end or somebody behind Lou so that way we can plug that vulnerable gap. And that's the purpose of exposing vulnerabilities. It's not just to, look at the defense and say, hey guys,
Right.
there's a weak guy, so let's attack that spot. No, it's to say that, hey, we have a spot here, a vulnerable spot that we need somebody to help us fill. And that's really what vulnerability is all about. And I think if we look at it from a strategic
Oh
perspective, instead of
man.
looking at it from a weaker spot of weakness, or potentially even looking at it as, hey, I'm just going to share my vulnerabilities, as you said, because I do agree that we've swung the pendulum way too far. We're sharing them with the intent on helping to develop and grow a closer relationship with our team or our partner or our significant other, whoever we have. We're sharing that so we can build a cohesive bond with them to ensure that our line is solid. And that's really what vulnerability is all about. It's strategically sharing our
I don't
vulnerabilities.
think I've ever heard it explained that well, honestly. And have been in this industry a long, long time talking about leadership and soft skills and such. But I'll tell you the other thing that piqued my interest that I mean I just latched onto was what you talked about with the enemy. That's what you do. You look for the vulnerability, and that's where you pierce and get behind the enemy line. In that same sense, there might be different motives, but in the same sense, I think it's a human tendency that if we see a vulnerability in our leader and the leader doesn't know about it, this is it for those who want to, that's where they pierce in. But this person, they don't like to be wrong about things. This is a serious vulnerability, and they will absolutely lie once they learn this. So let's push that and see if we can't put them on their heels. Such a powerful idea that you're talking about here.
No, thank you for that. And one of the things you just said, I mean, I wrote that down, and I don't know if everybody takes notes, but I highly suggest taking notes when you're learning from people because
Hmm.
as you said, I'm learning here too. You said, and the leader doesn't know about it, and
Hmm.
that's the premise of a lot of us leaders. We don't know the fact that we have to get to know ourselves first.
That's
That's the
right.
big. I believe that's the first thing in leadership. It's getting to know who you are, getting to understand the root cause behind your decisions, why you think the way you think,
Mm.
your biases, and so on and so forth. Because if you allow people to know your vulnerabilities before you learn your own vulnerabilities, you're right. That's going
Yep,
to set you up for failure. But
that's
if you
right.
are constantly self-reflecting, journaling, and trying to learn more about yourself, that's how you start to grow. And that's where we start to understand that, okay, if I am able to list out my vulnerabilities, of course, you have trusted colleagues, you have
That's
different
right.
methods out there, you have like the Clifton strengths, you have all these things that are out there to help you understand what your strengths and weaknesses or your vulnerabilities are. But if you're not doing that and assessing yourself and learning more about yourself, then it's going to be really hard for you to truly be intentionally vulnerable. And instead, you're right, you're going to just be showing your weaknesses and your vulnerabilities. And quite honestly, for many of us in these organizations, that the organization has a bottom line, right? So they're not going to have a weak leader or a leader who has multiple vulnerabilities out there in front of people because you can't afford to, especially not in our economy. You can't afford to have a weak leaders out in front who have all these unknown vulnerabilities, and they're just being propped up by their strong team.
There you
You have to
go.
ensure you have people you know.
There you go. But I also like, Lou, what you said about, using that analogy of a of a front line on a football team, and that okay, so you got one defender who's a little bit vulnerable. So let's put some backup in there. So you as a leader begin to look at your team or your organization and ask these questions. And so it's not a matter of, hey, let's throw this guy out because they're creating their sort of a weak link in here that might eventually have to be there. But one, you probably have to inform this person, hey, we need you to, really work on this part of your, of your defense work. But in the meantime, we got so and so is going to back you up a little bit here. So know that that's there as well. And we want you to keep working on it. And pretty soon we'll make more use of this person somewhere else. Just a beautiful analogy for leaders to understand vulnerabilities on your team and how to correct those things. Fascinating. But stated like a great military person, and I appreciate that so much. Well, let me ask you this, Lou, about, what convinced you, because you talk about this, about that you believe that connection matters more than charisma or authority and leadership and those sorts of things.
Yeah, so for one, I like to think of myself as a very charismatic
You
person.
are,
So
yeah.
I love people, I love telling stories, and I love all those things. So naturally, I would want to rely more heavily on those things. You know, I want to rely on being able to come in a room and just brighten the room and have these relationships. And it does
Mhm.
help. I think
Yeah.
that that is helpful. But if I'm only doing it for the sake of just being
Yeah.
charismatic and only doing it so people can get to know me, it's going to be very quickly seen through. And that's why I say connection is more important because number one, that connection, when we're talking about getting to know yourself, that connection allows them to feel comfortable enough to come to tell you where you need to improve and where you're doing well. Number two, that connection allows you to understand who they are. And as we already alluded to, people will tell you how to best lead them. But if you don't ever have that connection and don't know how to work with them and build those relationships, then they're just going to be, they're going to assume things about you that may or may not be right. And one of the things that I hate that people used to say, I used to hate it because I used to be like, that's not true, is perception is reality. We hear that all the time. And I'm like, that is not true. Perception is not reality. Until I really realized that people's perception is their reality. No matter what we like to say, it's their truth. And if that's their truth, because you've allowed it to be their truth, you haven't gone out and built a connection with them. And when I say connection, I don't mean, personal relationships with everybody in office, but I
Yeah.
do mean that they understand who you are. They've seen your human side in some ways, but they're not, we're not all friends. They've seen your human side, and you know
Yeah.
them. You understand what they're doing well, what they do well, and what they should
Yeah.
improve upon. Once you have that connection, then you're able to actually lead them better and provide them the resources, which is most important, so they can thrive.
Yeah. Well said. Yeah, I am one of those that pushbacks about perception is not reality, and I'm sticking to it, Lou. I'm not changing my mind on that. I get what you're saying, though. I talk a lot about perception in my work. I have whole models that I've built behind it, and I've really tried to explain this. I think it's a very important idea, is that I mean, technically, perception is not necessarily reality. And that's, I think, where you and I, when you held that, no, it's not. It's really correct way to look at it. It's not necessarily reality. The idea is that, though, to your point, is that if I perceive somebody, if I'll give a morbid example, somebody points a gun at me, and it's not loaded, uh, I guarantee I'm going to be scared out of my mind, even if they tell me it's not loaded. It still may scare the devil out of me because I'm like, dude, don't point that gun at me. It's not loaded. I don't care. And you can hear the perception of what I believe is happening and what the impact obviously might be. And what I like to say about perception as well is that, you know, perception is not necessarily reality, but that's what you have to discern and learn to discern as a human being. You know, is it holding you back? Is it a real stumbling block? Or by the way, do you lack perceptive skills? Do you just rush into something without stopping and checking your perceptions and these sorts of things? So, anyways, I'm glad you brought that up. Um, you know, yeah. So you're writing a book. I don't think it's come out yet, right? Called Lead Last. At least that's your working title. Tell us about that. First about Lead Last, and then I want to hear more about your book.
Yeah, absolutely. So lead last is just a philosophy I came up with. It sounds a lot like Simon Sinek's Leaders Eat Last, but it's slightly different in that the way that I'm talking about it is that there's things that you must do before you can be an effective leader. And that's why I came up with lead last. Number one, you have to get to know yourself, as we already alluded to.
There you
Number
go.
two, you have to get to know the people you're leading, because obviously you can't lead somebody if you don't know them. And number three, you have to get to know the environment you're leading in because you can't lead in an environment that you don't understand. And what I'm not saying is that you have to be a subject matter expert in everything, but you should at least understand the context of the environment you're leading in. And so that's what Lead Last is all about. And again, it's you're doing these things so you can create a lasting impact on the organization that you're leading. And that's what Lead Last is all about. And the reason I decided to write this book is because I was actually on a deployment at the time, And I was just sort of taking notes, from different people I interacted with, things that I'm learning about myself because I'm journaling, things I'm learning about my direct leadership, about leaders in different areas. And I'm like, there's good and bad that we all do. And I'm starting to study people around me and like, man, this is stuff that I almost wish I would have known. And so I wrote it for emerging leaders and to mid-career professionals about where I think this is going to resonate with. And I wrote it for them to just be able to have a concise guide, something that's very simple, down to earth. We have some examples in there of leaders who did well and didn't do so well. Have some scenarios in there to work through. We have some, basically some journal questions that you can ask yourself to work through. It's all kinds of things, just again to get you to the point to where you can now be an effective leader. And so it's almost more of a workbook and then
Wow.
a true guide that we're coming up with. It's supposed to be launched next spring, somewhere around June of
Nice.
2026, I believe is where we're targeting. And I'm publishing it through Amplify Publishing Group. So it's been a fun process. But again, it's just trying to get to help mentor these emerging leaders. So that way, no matter what
Yeah.
organization you're in or what industry you're in, you're able to learn these key fundamentals of just leading people.
Wow. Okay, so I'm gonna put you on the spot here. Um, I'm gonna throw out a few things that leaders eventually have to square off with, and ask you to, whether it's from your book or just your perspective. So when it comes to leadership, what's a thought or a tip about problem solving?
Yeah. So one of my favorite things to realize about problem solving is that you don't have all the answers. That's first and foremost. And
Hmm.
neither do you need to have all the answers. So problem solving is number one, knowing what the problem is. So you have to find a way to get to the actual problem, and then knowing what caused the problem. Because if you solve a problem one time and think that you're done with it, but you never knew what caused the problem, then you're probably going to have that a recurring problem soon. So those are first two things I tell people is again, know what the problem is and know that you don't have to have all the answers.
And listen, that know what the problem is. It's not automatic. People, work on the wrong problem and you get the wrong solution. And so I think you're so right about that's very, very important. Okay, how about decision making? What are your thoughts about decision making?
Yeah, so number one, don't be afraid to make a decision. So
Right.
that's one of the things that I have with I learned from emerging leaders is that sometimes we get a little too apprehensive and we're scared to make a decision. Don't be afraid to make a decision. You are paid to make decisions. But you also have to know that there are people who should be able to feed that decision. Don't be
That's
the
right.
one who's just making decisions in a stovepipe. Understand not just what your decision is, but understand how that decision impacts things in context. And the only way for you to get that information is to get feedback from others so you can learn from them.
Love it. And so speaking of feedback, how do you give feedback to let's start with your direct reports. There's somebody that, needs feedback. Um, Emotionally, they're kind of like this. How do you approach giving feedback?
Yeah, this was tough because I've heard
Yeah.
different philosophies. I've heard probably every leader's heard the sandwich method, where you say the
Yep.
positive, you give the negative, and then say another positive. I've also read that that's not effective, and in fact, it's a little bit misleading because
Mm.
at times, usually especially with new leaders, we tend to oversell the positives.
Yeah.
We tend to undersell the negatives, so the negative
Yeah.
almost doesn't sound like a negative, and you don't even
Yeah.
give corrective action, and then you give another positive. So what I always tell people is just be direct. Know what you want to say going into the room, and separate the emotional, personal side of it from the actual business side. This is a business conversation, and you stick to what the business is. I've had to have one of these conversations, and when I told the Marine, "Hey, you are underperforming. This has nothing to do with you as a person." So before we start talking about you or your family, or if we've already talked, even if we've already talked about that,
Yeah.
we go back to the original point. Is like, hey, here's what we're talking about. Here's what we want you to get to. We're not throwing you off the team. You're still a part of the team. But what we want you to do is we want you to perform better than what you're performing. And here's the things that we have noticed that you're doing. Here's the things that you can do to show us that you are improved, that you want to be a part of the team. And here's the consequences if you don't do it. And it's really that simple. And I
Wow.
think sometimes
Yeah.
it's tough to have those conversations as a newer person,
Yeah.
just because that's who we are. So that's
Okay.
what I say.
So I'm a colleague of yours. I'm a fellow major. We're sitting around the commander's conference table, and I got a bit of an ego. I talk too much. I think I'm the smartest person in the room. Everybody rolls their eyes, at least in the back of their head. And now Lou is finally going to be the person that gives me some feedback. So give me some feedback.
Yeah, first of all, we're gonna go talk in an unassuming environment. Usually, I
Nice.
like to do something very simple over a bowl of cereal, very one-on-one, and we're just going to talk. Hey, man, how do you think that meeting went? Oh, I think it went great. And sometimes it's depending on their opinion, and they say, hey,
Yeah.
man, I'll just let you know, man, that this is the perception of what you're doing. I don't know if you mean to do this, but this is how it is. And all depends on your relationship, right? If you and I
Yeah.
are colleagues and we're good friends, that conversation is probably gonna go over very well. If you and I don't have a relationship at all, and I'm trying to have this conversation, it may be a little bit tougher.
Yeah.
But it really goes back to, in this case, since we're colleagues, we're peers, we're equals. It's a good idea to not try to give the perception that you're talking from a supervisory perspective or you're talking with
Yeah.
authority, and instead you're talking as a friend. And that's how I believe the best way to approach that situation.
Very nicely said. Okay, but now I'm your boss.
Yeah, so that one is actually very tricky
Yeah,
because I've done
especially
it
in the
wrong.
military.
I've done it right and wrong.
Yeah, yeah.
I'll start with the wrong way. The wrong way is to walk in and say, uh, "Sir, with all due respect, can I speak freely?" Let's not do that. Let's start with let's not start with all due respect because chances are you're probably about to say
Correct.
something disrespectful.
That's right.
Let's start with talking about addressing the problem as it is.
Yeah.
Talking to the commander or your supervisor about the problem. Hey, I noticed that this is going on, and here the perception of what's being said is this. Is that your intent? Because you want to bring it back to the leaders, the supervisors. Hey, here's what we perceived that you said. Here's what we are going to execute on. Is that what you truly want? And that way, you're now reframing it to say that, hey, you've given us guidance,
Right.
you've told us what to do, and we just want to verify that that's what you're actually saying.
Yeah.
And in many cases,
Very interesting. Yeah.
I've realized that leaders didn't realize it. They say that's not at all what I meant. I've had one that was just like that. He's like, that's not what I said. I'm like, oh, okay. Well, based upon the conversation I had with the rest of the staff, this is what we came up with.
Yeah.
This is what we perceived that you said. And
Yeah.
sometimes, the best leaders, they bring you back in, they have a conversation about it to make
That's
sure
right.
they're clear.
Well, very well said. And we both know that doesn't matter, military, private sector, doesn't matter, that this is one of the reasons why you learn people skills,
Mhm.
that you can approach, listen, when things are going easy, they go easy. It's not a big deal. But, you got a good boss, it's all great. They're easy to talk to, that's all great. Well, what about when you have a boss or a colleague or a direct report? It's very difficult to discuss, but there's some serious things that you feel like you need to put on the table here. This is why you learn people skills, to learn how to be able to do these things, particularly when it's difficult. So listen, just tell us a little bit more about your book, some of the principles in it, and then just probably have one more question where I could actually ask it now. Maybe it comes out of your book, that you know I assume that you talk about mindset in your book, and if listeners could just you know have one shift in their mindset, or maybe one behavior that you believe would make them a better leader, what would you submit that might be?
Now, if I had to shift one thing, one mindset, and I do talk about this in the book, it's budget your time the same way you budget your money. And
Oh,
this is all about organizing yourself. And when I talk about that, I'm talking about the zero-based budgeting, like we talk about in budgeting with money. Do that with your time. Become more intentional about what you're doing, when you're doing it, and who you're doing it with in every aspect of your life. And this is where, from that idea, spawns my closed door policy. That made a lot of people upset when I brought it up. I even wrote a LinkedIn article about it
mm,
because it's counter to the open door policy, the one where everybody comes in, they share their ideas and things of that nature. And what I realized, and just based upon research, is that we get so distracted with our open door policies, and usually it's abused, that we don't use it effectively. Like we truly don't know
good
what's
point.
going on in our organization because the people who use our open door policy are usually using it way too often. And then the ones who should be using it don't use it because they're like, well, there's too much going on. I don't want to disturb them. And so there's things that are happening that we're not truly paying attention to. We're not being intentional on how we send and receive information. And so that's why I tell people to budget their time and get organized in a way to where you now know how you're going to receive information, you're going to send information. You now have a time where you're going to send and receive emails. And unless there's a decision that has to be made in snap time, you even have a time where you can make decisions, where your mind is clear, or when you can ensure that you're receiving the right information. But you only do that when you're organizing your day in such a way that you're now prioritizing the things that are important, just like Dwight D. Eisenhower has. And I did talk about that in my book. But you're prioritizing the things that are important and then removing the ones that aren't that important, or at least delegating the things that shouldn't be at your level. So I believe that's, if I had to choose one mindset to shift today, it's start budgeting your time the same way you
Wow.
budget your money,
Very
or
well
the same way you
said.
should budget your
Yeah,
money.
I didn't really see that coming, but it's a great tip, a great idea. Well, listen, before we close out here, I want to hear about you're an author of children's books. I think that's so cool, you know. You got a Marine officer here, has been a badass, been to war, major, very successful in accomplishment, and he's writing children's books. I think it's such a beautiful contrast. Tell us about your books.
Yeah, thank you. So, first of all, it's the Parent Child Connects book series, designed to create connections between parents or adults and children. And the only thing I'm trying to do there is get away from the idea that children should read books and come to their own enlightenment. Instead, find adults, and it goes back to mentors, find mentors who are sitting down with children and connecting with them, first of all, and then using those books to create teachable and memorable experiences.
Oh,
And so, the
interesting.
first book I wrote is called Crow from the Shadow. Essentially, that book is just written to, a version of myself where I was told all these things that I could not do or should not do, but decided that I'm not going to listen to the shadow, which is that person, place, or thing that tells you that you cannot be what you want to be. And I decided to overcome that. And really, at the end of that book, we talk about that only one can determine my future, and that one is me. And that's really what I've tried to help children decipher throughout that book. The second one's called Billy Dipper's Time to Shine. That one is truly about self worth. This is just a young star who's actually different from the Crow
Hmm.
in my first book, in that he's already a star, he's valued, he knows who he is, he's confident. And then something happens in his life to where he starts to lose his confidence. And it's just to remind young children or people in general that you should never forget that everybody brings value to the world around them. So never forget your
Mm.
self worth. And then the last one is called Horace the Horsefly. That's honestly is my favorite to read aloud because it's for the younger age group.
What is it again? Horse?
Horace the Horsefly.
Oh, that's too
And it's,
good.
yeah, it's just a rhyming story about animal sounds, sight words. That one has a little bit less of a theme or excuse me, a meaning, in that it's just for children to start becoming more engaged in reading. I wrote it because my youngest daughter at the time was 3, and I wanted something to connect with her, and so we had a good time reading that book. And quite honestly, the origin story behind the horsefly was literally I was being chased by a horsefly around my truck on when I was running. Every time I got in my truck, there was a horsefly there for some reason.
Oh, that's
And so
funny.
I was like, well, guess I'm gonna write a book about it. So really, that's my 3 books that
Yeah,
I have so far within my
yeah,
Parent Child Connect series.
yeah. God's got a good sense of humor, doesn't he? When he wants you to write a book, he'll make it obvious, But wow, I mean, that is so good. And I had another question, but I forgot what it was. Well, my goodness, what a great conversation. Can you please share with the audience where they can find you, where they can find your books, your information, whatever it is that you want to share? Because I know you have courses, I think, also, and maybe even some free resources. Please share away.
Absolutely. So the best way to find me is to go to parent-child-connect.com. You'll see my books. You'll see my YouVersion partner content partnership, where I'm able to provide Bible plans through the YouVersion Bible app. You'll see my free downloadable resources where we just talk about some of everything, just resources you can download and work and journal with your children. Again, you just go to parent-child-connect.com and you'll see all of that there. And there's also contact, so feel free to reach out and contact me because I would love to talk to you and talk to your children or talk to your organization, whatever it may be.
Yeah.
So just go to the website and that's where it starts.
I feel like I'd be remiss. I thought about it earlier and I said, nah, I'm just going to keep rolling. But I do want to share, maybe just very briefly, or ask, about. I'm going to ask it differently than maybe I would normally ask or that others ask, but I'm talking about your faith. How, um, I don't want to just ask, how did your faith play a part? I want to ask, how do you interact with your faith relative to the rest of your work? How does the intersection take place in your life?
That's a beautiful question.
Mm,
Number one, it's the foundation of everything. My faith is.
mm.
Every single morning I wake up, that is the first thing I do. And that's one of the habits I form when you're talking about budgeting your time. Apply at minimum 10 minutes to my spiritual faith. And that is, reading the Bible. First of all, I meditate, I read the Bible, I read my some form of Bible plan. Usually it takes a little bit longer than 30 minutes. And I pray. And that's the way I find myself back centered. And so every plan, every single blog post, everything can be tied directly back to the principles that are taught in the Bible. Many of them actually come from like Proverbs, right? And there's ways that my faith has led me through not just the content creation and being able to work with people, but it's also led me through tougher situations where the only thing I could think of was like, well, I have to keep pushing, right? When my son was diagnosed with complex partial epilepsy, that was the hardest thing for me to deal with in my life. When I'm looking at, because I saw him with his first seizure when it happened, and that was very hard for me to deal with. But my faith is what allowed me to work through that situation, knowing that if I can just push through, we'll be able to teach somebody else or testify to somebody else and help them through. And that we definitely have been able to do when we went through the miscarriage. Same thing. We've been able to help other people out because we've been there and we grew through those situations. But that was only possible because we had faith. So that's how the faith intersects. It really is truly the foundation of everything that I do. And it truly is how I start my day every single day. I open up my Bible app and I start off with my devotion. I start off my meditation and start thinking about what I can do to fulfill my purpose for being on this earth.
Man, dude, this happens every now and then. I invite somebody on my podcast, don't really know them, do my study up, but then that person comes on and just blows my mind. I mean, I just appreciate it. So, Olaolu Ogunye, thank you so much for being on Grow Yourself. And man, I really appreciate it. And God bless you.
God bless you as well. Thank you.
Thank you.